Ohio. Liberia, the state in the Western Africa. Borders on Sierra Leone in the west, Guinea in the north, Côte d'Ivoire in the east. The capital, Monrovia. Official language, English. Monetary unit, Liberian dollar. The country endured a coup on April 12, 1980, the period of military dictatorship of the Sergeant Samuel Dow in 1980, 1989 and two civil wars which followed this period. In 1989, 1996 and in 1999-2003 which claimed tens of thousands of the lives and had a catastrophic impact on national economy. Liberia, the poorest country of the Western Africa and the third in this indicator in the world. Besides, in Liberia unemployment rate is 85% of the population. Such unemployment rate is one of the highest in the world. In 1822 the USA founded colony on the lands bought in Africa, the independent state of the freeborn and liberated Afro-Americans, and in 1824 called her Liberia. Latin of liber, free, independent. In 1847 the Republic of Liberia was proclaimed. Anthropological and archaeological researches show that the territory of Liberia was populated at least since the 12th century. The people-speaking to men moved ahead on the west, forcing many small ethnic groups to move to the south towards the Atlantic Ocean. The Base, Fru, Agol and Sissi were among the first immigrants. This inflow amplified from the beginning of decline of the West Sudanese Empire of Mali in 1375 and the Singaiski Empire in 1591. Besides, internal regions underwent desertification, and their inhabitants were forced to move to more damp coastal areas. These immigrants brought skills of spinning of cotton, weaving, smelting of cast iron, cultivation of rice and sorghum, and socio-political institutes from the empires of Mali and Songhai. Soon after gaining the region by the tribe of Manayan, the former soldiers of the Empire of Mali, there was a migration of the people of Vai to the region Grand Piedmont. Vai were a part of the Empire of Mali, but were forced to migrate to coastal areas when the empire failed in the 14th century. The people of Kru opposed to inflow of representatives of Vai on their territory. Nanit's alliance and Kru stopped their advance, but remained Vai in the field of Grand Piedmont, where now there is a city of Robertsport. The population of a littoral zone built a canoe and traded with other inhabitants of the Western Africa from Cape Verde to the territory of modern Ghana. Later the European merchants began to trade with locals, lifting their canoe aboard the ship. Initially Kru exchanged with Europeans only goods, but later they actively participated in the African slave trade. Kru was left by the territories for work as the paid workers on plantations and in construction. Some of them even worked at construction of Suez and Panama channels. Other ethnic group in the region were N. As a result of gain to Monyagriba were forced to move further part of the coast which became Liberia later. Between 1461 and the end of the 17th century the Portuguese, Dutch and British dealers had trading stations in the territory of modern Liberia. Portuguese called this region of Costa de Pimenta the Peppery Coast. Later translated as the Grain Coast because of abundance of seeds of Malagasy pepper. The history of statehood of Liberia begins with the arrival of the first black American settlers, Americo-Liberian as they called themselves, to Africa, on the coast of which they in 1822 founded colony of free color people. Free men of color. Under the auspices of the American Colonization Society. Under the agreement with leaders of local tribes, immigrants got territories. More than 13,000 came. For goods with a total cost of $50 United States. In 1824 this colony received the name Liberia. Her constitution was adopted. By 1828 immigrants occupied all coast of modern Liberia. Extent about 500 km. And then also occupied parts of the coast of modern Sierra Leone and Côte d'Ivoire. On July 26, 1847 the American settlers declared independence of the Republic of Liberia. Settlers perceived the continent from which their ancestors were taken away in slavery as the Promised Land, however didn't seek to join the African community. Having arrived in Africa, they called themselves Americans and both Aboriginals and the British colonial authorities next Sierra Leone were considered as Americans. Symbols of their state. A flag, the motto and the press. And also the chosen form of government reflected the American past of Americo-Liberian. The religion, customs and socio-cultural standards of Americo-Liberian were based on traditions of the pre-war American South. The mutual distrust and hostility between Americans from the coast and radical of the remote place generated the countries of attempt proceeding throughout all history. Quite successful. Of Americo-Liberian minority to dominate over the local black whom they considered barbarians and people of the lowest grade. The basis of Liberia was sponsored by private American groups, mainly the American Colonization Society. The country also got informal support from the United States government. The government of Liberia was simulated on similarity American, and was democratic in a form, but not always in fact. The source isn't specified. 15-12 days. After 1877 the party of true Whigs monopolized the power in the country, and all important positions belonged to members of this party. Three problems which arose before the authorities of Liberia: the territorial conflicts with the neighboring colonial powers, Britain and France, military operations between settlers and locals, and threat of financial insolvency, called into question sovereignty of the country. Liberia kept the independence during the colonial partition of Africa, but lost at the end of the beginning of the 20th centuries a considerable part captured by her before the territory which was annexed by Britain and France. In 1911 borders of Liberia with the British and French colonies were officially established on the Mono and Cavalli rivers. Economic development at the end of the 19th century restrained due to the lack of sales markets for Liberian goods and debt obligations on a number of loans on which payment exhausted economy. At the beginning of World War I, Liberia announced the neutrality, expecting to keep trade relations with Germany, of which by 1914 more than a half of a foreign trade turnover of Liberia was the share. However, the blockade of maritime trade routes established by the Entente countries deprived Liberia this major trade partner. Almost completely import of industrial goods stopped. There were serious difficulties with food. In 1926 the American corporations granted to Liberia the large loan in $5 million. In the 1930 years, Liberia was accused of partnership to trade in slaves. Per all past, the permission was considered to hire labor in the territory of Liberia for plantations in Equatorial Guinea and Gabon. The enlisted workers were exposed to ill treatment and were practically on position of slaves. Because of these charges, the then President Charles King was forced to resign, and Great Britain even asked about establishment of guardianship over Liberia. The Commission of the League of Nations confirmed the main points of charges. After the beginning of World War II, Liberia proclaimed a neutrality again, but her territory was used for transfer of the American troops to North Africa. In 1944, Liberia officially declared war of Germany. After World War II, the USA granted the loans to Liberia, and soon Liberia became the large exporter of rubber and iron ore. In 1971, the President William Taban, who stayed at this post 5 terms, died. His place was occupied 19 years before by William Tolbert, who stayed in the status of the Vice President. Continuing foreign policy of the predecessor, Tolbert maintained close contact with the USA, but at the same time sought to raise a role of Liberia in the African affairs, opposed apartheid, in passing improving a relationship with the socialist countries. His economic reforms led to some positive consequences, however corruption and poor control leveled them. In the 1970 years there was a political opposition to Tolbert, and deterioration in an economic situation attracted increase in social tension. The prices grew, and it led to numerous rice revolts. The largest of them happened in April 1979, then the President Tolbert ordered to open fire at the rebelled crowd that as a result led to Massachusetts riots and a general strike. On April 12, 1980 in Liberia there was a coup. The President of the Republic, William Tolbert, was killed, his colleagues are executed. Power in the country was seized by the Sergeant Samuel Dow, the representative of the tribe the Crane, which appropriated a general rank. A fat first change of the power was apprehended by citizens positively, then continuous efforts of Samuel Dow on strengthening of the power and the continuing economic downturn entailed falling of his popularity and the whole series of unsuccessful attempts of military coups. In 1985, Liberia formally returned to civilian rule. October elections were officially won by Samuel Dow, who before it attributed to himself 1 year to correspond to the stated minimum age of the president of 35 years, and I made wide jugglings and falsifications. However, on independent polls, the opposition candidate, who received about 80% of votes, won. On November 12, 1985, there was an unsuccessful coup attempt used by the president as a reason for defeat of all discordant. During the followed repressions, about 1.5 thousand people, mainly of civilians, died. Already on May 3, 1986, I said in a speech on Das Television that national economy on the verge of crash. For joint decision-making in the key ministries and the financial organizations, representatives of the USA were invited. In September 1990 was killed by the field commander Prince Johnson, who brought him to one of buildings of the port. Freeport, largest in the Western Africa, and then brutally killed. To him at first broke hands, then castrated, cut off an ear and forced him to eat, and then killed. And at the same time video filming, which was presented then to the whole world, was conducted. In 2007 Johnson received senator's post in Ellen Johnson Sirleaf's government, the first woman president in Africa, and in 2011 unsuccessfully I ran for presidency, having received only about 12% of votes. At the beginning of the 90th in the country there was a large-scale conflict in which several fractions divided by the ethnic principle participated. The neighboring states for various reasons supporting various groups were involved in the conflict. In particular, at the first stage of war Charles Taylor's group was supported from the near countries of Burkina Faso and Côte d'Ivoire, from the remote countries of Togo and Libya. As a result, the country's opponents of the specified states supported Taylor's opponents. From next it led Sierra Leone to the beginning of civil war in her territory, what Taylor made considerable efforts for, having de facto become the founding father of the Revolutionary United Front. Military operations were conducted with big cruelty. In a Massachusetts order, tortures were applied. According to the most conservative estimates, war entailed transition more than 500,000 refugees to neighboring countries. Signing of the peace agreement and the election of the President of the Republic in 1997, which were won by Charles Taylor, became a result of the first round. The international community preferred to ignore the jugglings made on elections and massive violence in relation to opposition. After elections, Charles Taylor's opponents organized small-scale insurgent war, several times interfered on the territory of Liberia from the adjacent countries. In 2002, with the active help and support of the Ghanaian President Lansana Conté, the Great Opposition Movement Lords, which after the 1.5-year military campaign managed to depose Taylor, was created and to expel him from the country. At the presidential elections which took place in 2005, the famous football player George Weah, who won the first round with insignificant overweight, was considered as the favorite. However, the victory in the second round was won by the graduate of Harvard, the former employee of the World Bank and many other international financial institutions, the Minister of Finance in Charles Taylor's government, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. It was officially announced her victory on elections on November 23, 2005. It is the first woman president of the African country. The former Minister of Finance of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, won a victory at the election of the president of the country. According to the results announced on November 23 by Election Commission in the second round of presidential elections, it received 59.4% of votes. On December 4, 2003, the Interpol issued the warrant for the arrest of Charles Taylor on a charge of crimes against humanity and violation of the Geneva Convention of 1949. His name was placed in the list of the most wanted criminals. Nigeria, where at this time there was Charles Taylor, refused to obey, but agreed to transfer him to Liberia in case of receiving inquiry from the president of the country. On March 17, 2006, such inquiry was received. On March 25, Nigeria agreed to release only it that he could appear before the court in Sierra Leone. In 3 days, Taylor disappeared from a sea country house, Calabar, Nigeria, where he contained in exile, but on March 29 he was caught in attempt of crossing of border with Cameroon on the car with Nigerian diplomatic numbers. From there he was brought at first to Liberia, and then in Sierra Leone, where charges were brought to him. The agreement on Taylor's transfer to Special Court on Sierra Leone, who on April 26, 2012 found Charles Taylor guilty on 11 counts including crimes, was soon reached: mines, humanity, violation of the Geneva Convention and other international laws. On May 30, 2012 he was sentenced to 50 years of imprisonment. Liberia is on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean in the Western Africa. Borders on 3 states: Guinea, 563 km, In the north from Sierra Leone, 306 came. In the northwestern Côte d'Ivoire, 716 came. In the east, the coastline makes 579 km. The most part of the territory are coastal plains with low mountains, the highest point, Mount Montfut, 1380 m high. The woods occupy 18% of the territory. The climate is equatorial hot. From May to October there are tropical rains. Osakov drops out 50-100 on the coast and 1500 in deep areas. Average temperature is about +25 C. Minerals. Subsoil of the country contains reserves of iron ore, diamonds, gold. The main rivers, Mano, Lofa, St. Paul. A third of the territory is covered with the woods. Palm trees, a hevea, valuable tropical breeds of trees. In the east the savanna with an acacia and a baobab. The fauna is presented in Liberia rather widely. Dwarfish hippopotamuses, chimpanzee, elephants, buffaloes. Age and sex pyramid of the population of Liberia for 2020. Population -5.1 million. Assessment for July 2020. Annual gain -2.71%. Birth rate -38. 1 for 1000. Fertility level -5.24 births only woman. Mortality -10.9 for 1000. Immigration. Return of refugees. -0.6 for 1000. Infantile mortality -76.4 dead on 1000 newborns. Average life expectancy -55 years for men, 58 years for women. Contamination, a virus of an immunodeficiency. HIV. -1.7%. Assessment of 2007. Urban population -52.1%. In 2020. Ethnic structure. Black natives. To a Pella base it is given, etc. -95%, descendants of blacks from the USA. Americo-Liberian. -2.5%, descendants of blacks from the countries of the Caribbean Sea. -2.5%. Languages. English. Official. About 20% own, the others speak. About 20 groups of the native languages which generally don't have writings. Literacy -73% of men, 41% of women. Assessment of 2003. Religions. Christians -85%, Muslims -12%, native cults -1.5%, Baka, Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists. At the same time, a half of Christians of Liberia is made by adherents of Afro-Christian syncretic currents and sects. Large traditional Christian faiths are Pentecostals. Over 200,000. Methodologists. 181,000. And Catholics. 150,000. On November 8, 2005 in the country presidential elections, the first after 14 years civil war began. The former football player George Weah, English George Weah, and the former Minister of Finance of the government of Charles Taylor Allen Johnson Sirleaf applied for presidential post. The course of elections was watched by several thousands of international observers, and safety was ensured by about 15,000 Union peacekeepers and 3,000 Liberian police officers recruited on service week before. On November 23, 2005, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf won a victory and became the woman, the first in the history of Africa, elected to presidential post. It agrees to the results published by Election Commission. In the second round of presidential elections it received 59.4% of votes. George Weah received 40.6% of votes. In December 2017 George Weah was elected the president. In January 2018 George Weah entered a position of the President of Liberia. According to Economist Intelligence Unit, the country in 2018 was classified under the Index of Democracy as the hybrid mode. The economy and infrastructure of Liberia strongly suffered as a result of civil war. Now the country is one of the poorest states of the world. The DD per capita in 2008, $500. The 226th place in the world. This indicator is lower only in Burundi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Zimbabwe. About 80% of the population live lower than the level of economically reasonable poverty line. Traditionally one of the largest items of income are duties on use of a Liberian flag by merchant ships of other states. The country has large reserves of iron ore. There are scatterings of gold, diamonds, rare earth elements, agricultural, forest, hydroenergy resources. However, even before civil war, crude wood and rubber and also iron ore were the main export goods of Liberia. For export, coffee and cocoa were also produced. These goods are exported and also diamonds. In 2017 export made of Liberia $266 million, import minus $1.17 billion. The main buyers of Liberian goods: Germany 36.2%, Eswatini 14.2%, the UAE 8.8%, the USA 6.8%, Indonesia 4.7%. The main suppliers of import: Singapore 29.8%, China 24.4%, South Korea 24.5%, Japan 9.4%. The Act enters into the International Organization of the Countries. Liberia is divided into 15 counties, and those in turn into 53 districts. Area. Also far. Write comments. Read comments. Interesting people will tell interesting stories. All of good mood and good luck.